But, I know I'm the temp, but there's plenty of change that's already going on right now in the DOD. I think nobody's saying that this administration is sitting around waiting. And A&S is wasting no time in moving out and taking this new direction by the President and the Secretary. As you all know, Secretary Hegseth provided 3 broad priorities to guide everything we do, so I'm going to summarize those. There you are. I was missing you. So number 1, revive warrior ethos, increasing lethality with high, uncompromising, and clear standards. Number 2, rebuilding our military by matching threats to capabilities, reestablishing deterrence to defend our homeland, and working with our allies and partners to protect our American vital national interests abroad. So A&S is playing a key role in this action. We're remaining laser focused, I think, as you've seen, in strengthening our homeland defense and deterring Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific region, all while empowering our allies and partners to increase their burden sharing when it comes to defense. So clear, crisp priorities that have been reiterated, and I want to make sure you know we are 100% aligned to that. Our portfolio is pretty wide and pretty broad across 5 components to include industrial base facilities, housing, our nuclear mission, our chem bio mission, and more. We really have a hand in everything that the military does. What A&S does is its mission is core to delivering military readiness. Towards that end, A&S teammates are working apace to implement a number of executive orders. No shortage of executive orders. I think we're about up to 130 orders and proclamations with more to come. So we are in bed and in deep with making sure that we deliver on what the President has asked us. Part of reviving the warrior ethos is shifting people, resources, priorities from the bureaucracy to the battlefield. I understand you've probably heard some of that already today, talking about, how do we redirect some of our cuts, what we're doing with our people. So we're doing the same across the staff as well and looking at ways to streamline and remove some red tape. On the efficiency front, A&S is on point to reduce unnecessary and duplicative spending, whether it's these consulting contracts. Maybe you saw a memo from me. I got a lot of emails and a lot of texts on that one. And how we're managing the government purchase card. I think that one was a little bit more clear for the department. And we have this vast, real estate portfolio, hundreds of thousands of properties. We're looking at how that we can better align and perhaps collapse some of these leases and get rid of some property. So on a daily basis, we're providing logistics, engineering, surveillance, detection and monitoring support to the ongoing mission down at the southern border. A couple meetings every week to ensure that we're sustaining our active reserve and guard units that are deployed there to support the Department of Homeland Security. Consistent with protecting the homeland and per President Trump's EO, we're working with the industrial base and supply chain challenges associated with standing up the global dome, missile defense systems, working through how we're going to deploy these architectures to make sure that we deliver that rapidly. It's, one of our several major areas, including long-range munitions, shipbuilding, unmanned systems, to name just a few in the DoD, trying to, again, work better at matching the threats with capabilities consistent with the Secretary's second priority. So as you read, there is a rigorous analytic process underway, taking a relook at PB 26. You probably heard that, right? This is standard practice for any new administration that takes office inheriting a budget. So we really have 3 things going on right now. It's a little bit of a dance to make sure we get it in the right order. At 25, reconciliation, this relook, and then being prepared to go through our standard PB 27 process. So no shortage of balancing the balls and juggling things right now. Another thing that I wanted to share with you, the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary, the offices are assessing which programs and assets need to be plussed up relative to the President's priorities versus those of lesser priority. So again, we're re-looking at some of the things we did in the past, what we're going to put more money against and perhaps what we're going to stop doing. I think you've heard all that messaging and where our focus is. However, those decisions, we'll make our best recommendations and advice, and we'll let the Secretary determine, how he reprioritizes those allocations. It's our obligation to ensure that via policy and oversight that these capabilities are produced, right? That's our role as a staff, and that we're delivering at scale and affordably. The bulk of new technology innovation, especially software, takes place in the commercial sector. So I think you've all kind of gotten that memo as well, that we're trying to increase the use of commercially available systems. You operate on a much faster timeline at delivering. There's notable differences in these business models than from traditional ways of doing business. Through the introduction of the Adaptive Acquisition Framework. You remember that? I remember that, yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, we still got it, and quite frankly, we're going to keep it. It was initiated under Secretary Lord and my dear friend here. And, we've been able to tap into new technologies quicker, right? And we're really on the first turn of this, so that's something that we want to keep pursuing and build upon. Despite some of these gains, including the new pathway for software and the middle tier acquisition, commercial solutions openings, other contracting authorities, we're using these methods to try to streamline acquisition and some of our contracting techniques. We want to do that, but quite frankly, I think our practitioners have been using it as a workaround more than standard practice. So we really want to get after, operationalizing those tools, as really the default method versus, as a last resort. It's just often the case with acquisition. What's needed at this point, I'll say, is not new regulations, rules, or radical reform. But quite frankly, what we need is a change in culture and behavior, right? That's what's going to make, rapid innovation the overriding priority and result, right? Change in culture and behavior, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The recent release of the new software policy memo, anybody see that? You might have seen that. You might have missed that. I'm not sure. I know my phone was blowing up when that got released. But that's Secretary Hegseth's way of, in just 6 weeks into his tenure, introducing some change. And I'll tell you right now, it's a sign that he's determined to drive the system to operate differently. So I think we're all on notice that, again, we're not going to do things as business as usual, that we're going to find a way at implementing change quickly. And just understand, we may make a couple mistakes along the way. That's what happens when you're going at rate. But we're going to fix those mistakes, and then we're going to move on. And I think that's kind of the approach we're seeing. When it comes to now with software development, we got that memo out, and it's not the exception. This is going to be the standard way of doing things. So, of course, all defense innovation in the world is little avail if we can't produce and sustain at scale, right? I can come up with all the innovation I want, but I got to be able to make it, right? And I got to be able to do that at scale. So there's a coffee mug that sits on my desk. It says "Logistics wins wars," right? In recent years, spurred by COVID crisis and the war in Ukraine, there's been fresh understanding of the importance of America's domestic production capability, from medicine to minerals to munitions, right? In response, over the past 3 fiscal years, nearly $2 billion in Defense Production Act funding has been obligated to enhance domestic industrial capacity for microelectronics, castings and forgings, batteries, solid rocket motors, energetics, and more. We recognize the need to build resiliency and close gaps in each phases of the supply chain, and not from factory to foxhole, but we're really thinking from a mine to foxhole now. A&S is overseeing the implementation of the National Defense Industrial Strategy, which focuses on deterrence throughout the Indo-Pacific. And in doing so, we are aligning industrial-based investments to support priorities laid out by the President and Secretary Hegseth. America's ability to deter China will depend in large part on production capacity, as well as innovating new capabilities and warfighting approaches. And right now, we don't have enough of it, at least for crucial weapon systems and supply chain. The President, Secretary, and congressional leadership recognize the urgency of this industrial capacity challenge. Is anyone familiar with Senator Wicker's Forged Act? You might have heard about that too. So for instance, highlight some of the ways and opportunities we as the department and as a nation can cut some red tape, create more competitive defense marketplaces, modernize the defense budget process, and enable decisive action, all in the service of unleashing the power of American industry. A lot of good stuff in that act. We look forward to working with Congress as the bill continues to be refined and eventually on its implementation. But beyond the assembly line, U.S. military success also depends mightily on keeping combat systems operational and mission capable. This is really the operational readiness component of what we do. We spend a lot of time on the structural side of things, the new systems. Do I have the right modern system in the right quantities for the right capability? But we also have to balance that with operational readiness. And no one in the world can move as much as we move, as fast as we move it, anywhere on the planet. It's all part of what I would call the deterrence effect of logistics and sustainment. You might have heard Honorable Lohman used to talk about sustainment as a deterrence effect. Well, I'm kind of broadening it out because that logistics effect and sustainment, i.e. in this context, weapon system sustainment, work in combination to deter our adversary. So the idea is that if a potential adversary knows that your logistics capabilities are robust and deep, and that you are in it for the long haul, they'll be less likely to engage in hostilities because they know that they'll not just be outgunned and outmaneuvered, but they're going to be outsupplied. Now, there's a widespread understanding when it comes to readiness and operational availability, the U.S. defense enterprise has been falling short. DoD, in its most recent semi-annual report to Congress, found some examples. The reduced availability of amphibious ships, in turn reducing Marine Corps' ability to respond in crisis and contingency. If you look at aircraft availability and mission capability rates over time, you will see that they've all declined, particularly our TAC air fleets. Both the Air Force and the Navy are routinely and excessively cannibalizing parts to keep aircraft flying. In practical terms, when critical weapon systems are not available, much less fully capable due to maintenance or supply shortages or due to delays in modernization, they might as well not be in the inventory. And we need that inventory to meet the warfighter's requirements. So Secretary Hegseth and his team are determined to change that, which means we need more logistics and sustainment capacity in multiple areas. It's a capacity issue. Capacity to do maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Distribution capacity. That is everything from our warehousing capacity to delivery vehicles to ships to cargo capacity, freight capacity. Capacity in the private sector, in the U.S. defense industrial base, but also our capacity in organic industrial base. They work hand in glove. The ability to deliver distribution, supply, maintenance, logistics, health services, operational contract support, these are all core functions of logistics to sustain the joint warfighter in any contingency. In addition to sustainment capacity, we need to look at sustainment innovation. Oftentimes we don't use sustainment innovation together in a sentence, but I'll tell you right now, if you go out to any of the MROs in the organic enterprise and you see that production capacity and understand what they're doing, they're solving problems every single day using innovative approaches. You just don't hear about it because they don't stop the production line. We're looking at data-driven analytics and decision-making and incorporating that into our sustainment enterprise. the digital tools that are available that identify and quantify readiness degraders, mitigations for supply chain risk, optimizing resource allocation across all domains in the services. These tools are being used today to make better decisions for our leadership and make better investment decisions. Better use of data is helping to move logistics and sustainment support to the tactical edge. Leveraging the data foundation we have available, ANS's role is looking at integrating these best practices across organizations in a more holistic and quantifiable manner. So there were lessons learned from Ukraine about providing support and repair from outside the combat theater as well. So this includes these near and abroad MRO capabilities and telemaintenance capabilities that were stood up out of necessity. Now these kind of techniques are being applied across all regions. But make no mistake, the current pacing priority is our Indo-PACOM theater, where U.S. forces will be taxed by long distances, long external lines of communication. Large theater-level maintenance and supply hubs, what in my day we would call those Iron Mountains, that we enjoyed in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, they're not going to be available in the first island chain. We're not going to have internal lines of communication either. So this is a monumental shift in how we're going to have to support our warfighter. The military services, as you probably heard today, they're all leaning forward to overcome these challenges. And this is what we call the contested environment, right? It's going to be contested. It's going to be challenging because of the distance, the tyranny of distance. And it's challenging because we don't have the capacity today that we had in days past. So finally, I would note that while the administration changes, and with them these changes are, shift our policy and maybe our resourcing priorities, our obligation to keep U.S. forces ready to fight, and if necessary, get them in the fight and keep them fighting, does not change. These are the enduring requirements and the reason logistics and sustainment are core to winning wars. So Jim, I think I'll stop with that summary, and we'll turn things back over to you and answer some questions.
Yes, sir.
Steve, one thing you didn't mention was what is happening to the two rapid acquisition organizations in ANS, the JRAC and the JPAC. Are they both still able to produce, or have they had to shift their emphasis maybe to the new secretary's priorities, but they're still in place?
So thanks for that question. So they are still in place, right? And I'll just go back to with changes in administration's policy and resourcing may change, but the need for this rapid acquisition cells and the rapid production that our JPAC is doing, that is not changing. I'll tell you, we're looking at how we're going to realign those two resources organically within ANS, under perhaps some efficiencies that we're thinking about. We're investigating where to best align them. There's some synergies there, having them in ASDA. But they are operating and will continue to operate and doing some great things. The relationships they have built with our industry, I think our partners that, maybe who have worked with them in the room here know the value that they're providing and the focus that they're providing. One of the things that we've learned, over the past couple of years too, is that, the work they're doing in alignment with how we resource and how we work them into the budget cycle to make sure that we're advocating for whether it's DPA priorities and prioritizing some of the munitions work we're doing, or what the JRAC does with prioritizing GUONs and GEONs to make sure that we're covering down on those urgent requirements that are a bit outside of traditional acquisition. We make sure that they're aligned to how we're resourcing. So thanks for that question.
So you mentioned Secretary Hegseth's memo on software acquisition pathways, and I'm curious how that's being received and internalized within both OSD and as it's pushed down to the services, how they're interpreting it, what it means. Is it a total delinkage between hardware and software, or is it something else? What's the vibe on that?
Yeah, the vibe on that, I think there was a lot of angst up front. But I mean, hopefully you've read that memo, and I got to be honest with you, I don't think there's much angst at all. I mean, really, it's shifting us. If you take a look at it, it talks about CSOs, and other transactions, right? These are tools that are already available, right? This is not new. So again, where I think what we're trying to say is it's the preferred approach. We want to shift behavior. It's back to my earlier comment. We really need a cultural change in how we do business, right? Not this read a step, do a step kind of approach, right? We need to leverage the tools that are available to us where they make sense to go quicker. I'll just share with you OTAs. My first exposure to OTAs was during COVID, right? When we had the Joint Acquisition Task Force and the Air Force, as the executive agent for DPA, they were supporting us. And that was my first introduction, but it enabled us to go a lot quicker, with white papers, that the companies could provide us. It helped us make down selections much quicker. It helped us get things on contract faster. And once you learned how to use the tool, you didn't want to go back. It's right. Everybody have a crosscut saw in their garage, right? Once you learn how to use the skill saw or the circular saw, you're not going to use that thing anymore, right? It's just using a new tool. So I think that's really what we're trying to do. Use that as the preferred approach. We also have tailoring. I don't know, I was at an event a few weeks ago talking to Miss Lord. It says we can tailor, right? Everybody has the ability to tailor to their own needs, right? And we just have to, I say, have a little courage, maybe, to use some of those things and step out of the traditional way of doing business. And that will help us. Right now, we have about 85 programs using this, the software pathway, which is not much, So again, the secretary is really trying to change the behavior and encourage the use of these new pathways. So I think that's what it is. When I get calls about this, I just try to put it in that context. Don't be afraid of it. You already have the authorities. This isn't changing that. But we're telling you right now, you need to start practicing it and using it and implementing it so that we can deliver more rapidly. So.
You mentioned briefly the National Defense Industrial Strategy implementation plan. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about how that's going and when industry will start to see some of the things that are being implemented?
Yeah, so it took us a while to get that out, didn't it?
Yeah.
And, you may say it kind of reads a bit, I've heard a little criticism, it reads a little bit like a laundry list or, a kitchen sink approach, but, it was necessary to kind of write down what our strategy is, centered around the 5, critical supply chains. Now it gives us some linkage and prioritization of how we're going to use some of the tools to close, the gaps in those supply chain areas, particularly with our investments in IBAS and Defense Production Act. That I will tell you, just, not trying to spoiler alert here, but you're going to see more emphasis on that, right? Better alignment to the strategy. That's kind of the North Star. So if you read it and understand why those are critical to us, because they deliver on all of our weapon systems. So that's going to guide us, So I think we're at the front end of this. We just wrote the implementation plan. I spent the last 2 weeks going over this same topic with our industrial-based policy team, So I would just offer for industry, if you have questions on that, you can reach into industrial-based policy. The PTDO or the acting there is a Dr. Vic Ramdas, very knowledgeable, comes from the Army, has been working, he's worked these issues before. We want to be open and transparent with you so that you understand, how we're proceeding. So, looking forward to working with you on this.
So you've talked a little bit about acquisition. You've talked a little bit about industrial-based strategy. aligning to the overall department strategy. Now in your sweet spot, sustainment, and how mRNO is a big piece of the puzzle for competition in Indo-PACOM. Anything you can update us on the regional sustainment framework and where that's going?
Okay, no, I'm glad you asked that question. In fact, Miss Lisa Smith, she's our DASD for product support. Her team has been leading this effort, for a couple of years now. So I did ask her today, I said, I bet I will get a question on RSF. So thank you for that question. So I think you all understand what it is. It's really opening up the repair network globally, is the bottom line, and leveraging the capacity of our industry partners, our allies and partners in the regions to establish this regional maintenance and repair and overhaul capability, right? And it's not just, end item overhaul, right? It's commodities repair is equally important to the end item. So we've been working primarily in the Indo-PACOM region. When we first rolled this out, we had what we called a reverse industry day and got the feedback of companies in the Indo-Pacific region to test what their interest was in doing this kind of thing, and got overwhelming interest. So we put together some pathways for how we wanted to implement these pathfinders based on the force services, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps. And again, we work with the COCOM to say, what are the things that you need repair of in your region based on your force structure and what forces are going to deploy in there. So we got feedback from the COCOM and the services, and some of the Pathfinder projects are things like the MIDS jitters radio. The Navy is exercising a Pathfinder with a nation in the Indo-PACOM region. Marine Corps has the PRIC 117, which we call that the Harris radio. That's another handheld radio. So they're on a Pathfinder to do repair. We own the tech data on that one. That's a really, I'll say, a quick win. So they're standing up regional repair. Air Force is commodities repair for some of their systems, F-16, HX-60, and then the Army watercraft system, right? In fact, we're showing some gains there already where they overhauled one of their logistics ships in theater. It saved 36 days of non-availability time in transit time. So it's already delivering. And that's really what it's about. It's about compressing the repair cycle, right? Shortening that repair cycle time so that I can increase the availability of those systems. So it's going well. We're expanding to CENTCOM and EUCOM. If you think about what's going on in Ukraine, it's being implemented right now. I mentioned the near abroad MRO capabilities with the bordering countries where we're moving equipment back and forth and repairing it. So we actually learned some lessons there in how we were going to apply it. But that theater is in CENTCOM are the two next ones we're looking at. There's some systems in CENTCOM that we're interested in. So we really want to broadly expand it. Last thing I'll say about it is it's institutional. We hired some, and expanded some capacity to do this work. And it's going to be enduring for the next 3 to 5 years, and then it'll transition to the services. I think we're approaching the end of the time here. Maybe.
Jim, any closing comments?
Mm-hmm. Hello, Jim.
I'm sorry, sir. A couple of thoughts, and then also the gentleman right there. You wanted to ask the Golden Dome, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Undersecretary, thank you very much for your time. I'm an attorney, Robert McGuire. I tend to think in terms of quiet diagrams,
I know.
acquisition regulation. It's like an ankle tattoo, trying to get rid of it.
Oh.
But in your opening remarks, sir, I think you said Golden Dome was great, high on the list of the new administration. Who are you going to task to lead that? Is it going to be a service acquisition, or is it going to be an MTA type of program to get that program done?
Well, so, we're putting together the framework, the leadership framework for that. There's different concepts being talked about. One of them is a direct report program manager. You may have heard that term before. We use that framework today. Navy has some programs. But this is a team sport on this one here, right? So you can expect, some of the same team players to be part of this. MDA is going to be part of it. To think that you can execute this without MDA, it's just not going to happen. The services are going to be part of this. I describe this as, I imagine we have a few engineers out there, right? Systems engineering is like, to me, the most important thing we do, with the engineering disciplines. This is like the monster systems engineering problem. It's the monster integration problem, right? Because it's going to be layers of architectures working together, at all, group level elevations and trying to protect, the United States. Not a simple, it looks easy on television, in a Marvel comic, but this is going to be really, really tough to solve. So we're going to need all the services and agencies that are going to do this kind of work to step up. And then what we may put in place is this framework that allows quicker decision-making is really what is going to make this go faster. So hopefully that answered your question.
So we're literally out of time, but if you had 10 seconds left, what would be the one message to industry that they need to take away today?
Yeah, so, we really want to operate at speed and scale, I guess is what I'm saying here. We do need to deliver this capability. I think everybody recognizes the urgency, and we got to go faster, but we have to also do it in a disciplined way, right? Because we have to deliver, a product that works every time. And there's disciplined processes that we just can't sacrifice for speed. So, the balance between speed and scale, making sure that whatever, reform efforts we put in place, really reform the system. And I didn't talk about it really in my comments, but, we have requirements, we have acquisition and sustainment, and we have a budget process that we have to work within, right? This is a systems engineering problem, right? So if I want to try to reform one part of it, I'm probably not going to be successful, right? I have to really look at the whole problem set and make sure that I put in place the right change that gets to that speed and scale. So I would leave you with that. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity.
Well spoken,
Thank you for
sir.
your